Well, good evening everyone. My name is Doug Chipman, the Mayor of the City of Clarence, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to this council meeting tonight. Before proceeding, I would like to ask those present to stand for the council prayer. Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this council, direct and prosperous deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the City of Clarence. Amen. I'd like to acknowledge also the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting tonight. Pay our respects to elders past and present, and also recognise their continuing spiritual connection to the land. Thank you. In declaring the meeting open, I'm delighted again to welcome a member of the community to our council meeting. COVID-19 restrictions have been relaxed to the point where up to 12 members of the public can attend these meetings by prior booking. Nevertheless, we will continue to broadcast our meetings live on YouTube. The link and the agenda papers are available on Council's website, but I do need to remind everyone present that what is said in this meeting is not protected by privilege. I note we have a full house, so there are no apologies. Are there any declarations of interest?
Yes, I have one for 11.3.3.
Thank you. There being no further, I'll move to the start items. We'll deal with a number of items on the agenda as one Omnibus Motion. Firstly, the confirmation of minutes for the 21st of June as circulated be taken as read and confirmed. Are there any comments on the previous minutes? That council workshops conducted on the 28th of June and the 5th of July and the agenda briefing on the 9th of July be noted. That reports from outside bodies, noting that we have no petitions to be tabled unless there are any from the floor. Copying refuse disposal site joint authority, the June quarterly reports pending. Did you wish to add anything to that?
No, at this stage.
And I have nothing to report for Tas Water or Greater Hobart Committee. Council and special committees and other representative bodies. Are there any reports, please? Alderman James.
I think, Mr Mayor, the Power Recreation Centre meeting, we had a meeting recently. I haven't got the minutes with me, but I will provide them to the General Manager in the next week or so.
Thank you. There being no others, I'll now invite a motion to adopt the officer's recommendations into all the start items, please. Thanks, Alderman Pearce. Seconder. Alderman Edmonds, thank you. All those in favour? The motion is carried unanimously. Moving on to Mayor's communication, I'd like to table the calendar for myself, Deputy Mayor, and other aldermen representing Council and myself. And also I'd like to table the certificate of election from LGAT. Mayor Christina Holmdale from West Tamar was re-elected as President. And representing the South, we have Alderman Beck Thomas from Glenorchy, Southern Major Councils. But I'll table that.
Mr Mayor, will that be circulated, please?
Certainly. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to seek leave of the Council to make the following statement.
Please continue.
Thank you. Following the Code of Conduct panel's determination, I, Alderman James, I apologise to the Mayor, Alderman Doug Chipman, and also to my fellow Alderman. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I say that your apologies are accepted graciously, and I look forward to continuing to work with you for the best interests of the City of Clarence.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Public question time. General Manager, I understand we have a question on notice from Mr Kerry Turfrey.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we do take a question on notice from Mr. Turfree. The question was, Mr. Mayor, could you please advise who are the developers / financiers for the proposed Rosny Hill project?
Thanks, General Manager. The Hunter Developments is the preferred developer for Rosny Hill, and Council has not been notified of a financier, which is ultimately a matter for Hunter Developments, the preferred developer, to announce. Answers to previous questions on taken on notice. There are none. Questions without notice. General Manager, you understand we have several?
Thank you, Mayor. We have 3 questions on notice, questions without notice tonight. The first one is from Mrs. Joanne Marsh of Bellreeve. Mrs. Marsh's question reads as follows. The City of Clarence News, winter 2021, states that the Council is extremely concerned about the high level of bacteria in a section of water at Harra Beach that poses a risk to public health. Doan Estuary Program CEO said the ratings were based on 5 years of data. Council have now announced a number of investigations and projects prioritising getting to the source of the contamination at Harra Beach. What proactive steps had Council taken to monitor water quality at our beaches and bays, detect sources of any contamination and remove them prior to receiving the current water quality ratings, which were publicly released on Monday the 28th of June? We propose to take that question on notice.
Thank you.
The second question without notice was from Mr. Victor Marsh of Bellreeve. Mr. Marsh's question is as follows. What is the latest updated information about the completion and opening of the public to the public of the Kangaroo Bay Public Pier breakwater and the installation of the new irrigation system at Kangaroo Bay Oval? I can provide the following answer. In relation to the public pier, Council is working with the contractor to resolve final outstanding works, including underwater grouting work for the supporting piles. This work requires specialist subcontractors to undertake the work, and timing of those works is contingent on the availability of the subcontractor. In relation to the Kangaroo Bay Oval irrigation, Council staff are finalising the contract execution, with works expected to commence later this month. The third question is from Mrs. Denise Hogan of Rosny. And the question is, given that the Rosny Hill NRA management strategy is due to expire and that the Rosny Hill Nature Recreation Area Reserve Activity Plan is due for development, when will the Reserve Activity Plan be ready for public consultation? And secondly, please list all people working on the Reserve Activity Plan, both within Council and from any other source. We propose to take that on notice.
Thank you. I note that we have no deputations from members of the public tonight and no motions on notice. Moving forward, and we have no petitions to determine either. Which brings us then to Council sitting as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. Item 11.3.1 is a development application at 22 Bridge Street, Richmond for signage. Alderman Edmonds.
Mr Mayor, I wish to move the alternative motion circulated to staff and Alderman this afternoon.
Everyone got a copy of that? Alderman James, I take it you're second again?
Thank you very much.
Roger. Please continue, Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and before I start I'd also like to thank Mr Lovell and Mr Nielsen for vetting the motion and doing me the honour of confirming there were no red flags in it, so thank you very much for that. Tonight I'm hopeful... George, you want me to pass that? Tonight I'm hopeful that we'll see the end to a saga that's dragged on since 2019. The problem with a small diagonal sign has morphed into an issue with a small bronze statue of a dog and some photos in a window. I have concerns about the reach of Council that we can object to small bronze animals. You only have to walk around Richmond to see there's other signage in this area that's larger, more cluttered and more of a threat to the heritage values of the town. I'm concerned that by refusing this application, that all the other signage in Richmond will be next in the gun for retrospective refusal, and yet more time, effort and money will be poured down the drain chasing pedantic anomalies in the heritage guidelines and info sheets referred to in the report. The conflict between the council and this business has drawn significant public attention. A business smashed by COVID, dealing with anti-business red tape. The report refers to mediation and meetings held, but having personally attended some of these, I would not say that they got to the crux of solving the problem, more only to exacerbate the divide between the parties. We more recently had a debate to waive discretionary fees, which was refused, but it is important to note that however that was an entirely different matter, and tonight we are dealing with a development application. Since that time, we've received a petition of more than 1,600 signatories. This DA has drawn interest on national TV, on Sunrise, national radio, on Kennedy Malloy, various national news organisations, as well as coverage in Tasmania's newspapers, TV, radio, as well as social media. And why I think that's relevant is, despite all of this attention, after being advertised, no representation was received against the signage. Not a single one. It didn't matter. Council already had discretion to approve the signage, and without any representations would face no further appeals to its decision, as there are no representatives against. So let's just get on with it. Some may wish to talk about precedent. However, I refer you to the fact that this recommendation for refusal sets its own precedents about small bronze animals in front yards, among other things. I mean, seriously, lock up your garden gnomes. Surely, after 2 years of this circus, common sense has to prevail. The signage has been in place for years and the sky has not fallen in. Indeed, Richmond continues to set the pace for tourism in Clarence. The fact that so many supporters of the Puzean petition came from outside our city shows that it only enhanced the visitor experience for quote-unquote out-of-towners. This is a tourism business that has and will have to fight its way through COVID challenges like international and state border closures. We've already made them pay above the odds to lodge their development application. Despite all the public attention, not a single objection was lodged. Our role as aldermen in the local government system is to be the conduit between the guidelines and the real world. I think we understand that because every single alderman at this table or in this room has used their discretion and broken ranks from the officer's recommendations to vote to both approve and refuse DAs several times in the last few years. Tonight, I'm hopeful that enough aldermen will do the same again. Let's stand up for common sense planning decision. Much hype, no representations. Common sense should prevail. I commend the motion and seek the support of colleagues.
Thanks, Alderman Evans. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I refer colleagues to page 19 of the officer's report, and clause E 17.6.1 P1. A sign must be a discretionary sign in table E 17.3. The comment under the assessment is, and I quote, the three sign types are all discretionary signs within table E 17.3 and therefore satisfies the requirements of the performance criteria in relation to that. Furthermore, it goes through a number of other performance criterias because we are dealing with performance criterias and not necessarily acceptable solutions, because this is basically to do and requires the signs code to be considered. Having said that, if you turn to the diagram on page, which actually is a picture of the actual signs, you can see that the actual sign possum is quite prominent, but then again there are other signs that are in that main street, and also too there are smaller signs which are located either in the building, in the windows of the building, alternatively just on the outside of them. So when we are considering signage as distinct from overindulgence, if that's the word, in providing signage, this in fact provides what I believe is an appropriate signage for a tourist place within the city. The other factor that needs to be taken into consideration is that this council regards Richmond as the jewel in its crown. And we know that, and we want to seek people, visitors, tourists, to actually go to Richmond and enjoy, and not only that, spend their money, because it benefits not only the Richmond folk in that vicinity, but also all of the city of Clarence. This is a draw card. It's not over excessive, and it mainly promotes, and I believe, the tourism mecca, which I think exists within the Richmond area, and I think it's an admirable actual proposal, and I seek council support.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Walker, you interested in speaking? Okay, well, no need for a right of reply. I'll put the motion, all those... Oh, look, no one's called it. I'll put the motion, all those in favour.
No, Mr Mayor, I thought that Alderman James was...
I'll ask for a retraction of that statement.
Walker. That's what I just said.
Well, I'm sorry, but I've already called for a motion. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to 11.3.2, the development application.
This
clearly I saw that it was moving to stand up, and then when you gave the floor to Alderman James, she then sat down. So
to Alderman Walker.
The most I can do is apologise to Alderman Monteberto for not seeing her when she did that. The motion has been called and voted on. Moving on to 11.3.2, development application at 95A Gordons Hill Road. And it's for an upgrade to existing telecommunications facility.
Clarification, was a right of reply, was the speaker given?
It wasn't necessary because we only had 2 people speaking, one for and both for. Can we move on, please? Moved. Thank you. Seconded? Seconded. You want to speak about the Telecommunications Tower?
The only thing I want to say on this one, Mr Mayor, is I know that that there are people who live nearby that quite rightly like to have their say on these sort of matters and raise some concerns, but at the end of the day, this sort of infrastructure is a pretty critical piece of infrastructure that benefits the whole community in terms of their ability to keep in touch with family and friends and loved ones, and I certainly think that there's policies and procedures in place to sort of regulate how these things are done, and at this stage, they've gone through the process, approved, developed went through the planning scheme. The infrastructure itself, I'm sure, has got certain protections and things built into it. And, I'd encourage my colleagues to support this one because it's, as I said, it's a pretty important part of our public infrastructure that we need to have in our city and other areas around the country as well.
Thank you. Alderman James.
Yes, it's an interesting location of this telecommunications tower, because if you look at attachment 1, it's a very narrow access point just off Gordons Hill Road, and the actual location is well within the bushland setting of the area that abuts Wassell Place, Radiator Drive in particular. And if you actually access Radiator Drive, you actually access, if I can use that word again, into a narrow walkway, which is a council access way, and it's been revegetated and so on, and it's quite clear removed, other than a neighbour that has his fence, which is basically on the higher side, and on the lower side is another residence, but that's quite a distance from this tower. So this particular location, Mr Mayor, is ideal for the actual upgrade. And if we had more of these sort of locations, and I think back down to Sanford when we had that other discussion and so on, but this particular one is well placed. It's away, and there's a couple of representations, but I think if you look at those representations, they are planning to do with, not overhanging or causing any undue amenity loss to those dwellings. Support the motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman. There's only been a speaker for and another one for. I'll call the motion. All those in favour? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Alderman Edmonds, you wish to... 7.3.3 is a development application for 27 Bridge Street, Richmond food van. Alderman Mulder.
Mr Mayor, yes, I'm moving an alternative motion that's been circulated and I think it appears on the board. This is still a refusal, Mr Mayor, according to the officer's recommendation, but it's just removing the issues, the reasons relating to the signage, for the reasons in order to provide consistency and for the same reasons as in the previous motion.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Alderman Walker. Alderman Mulder. Thank you. Alderman Walker. Any other speakers?
Yes, I'd
Alderman
like
Berto.
to speak, Mr Mayor. I have to say that this is one of the most unfortunate council meetings that I've been to for a very long time. I actually feel that what is the purpose of us actually having a heritage code within Richmond? Because we are not abiding by it. We're not abiding by it in terms of the signage aspects of the historic precinct. We have the audacity to actually say that we believe that Richmond is the jewel in the crown for historic and cultural purposes, and yet we cannot uphold our own planning scheme. I certainly will not be supporting this motion without the aspect related to signage. And as far as I'm concerned, perhaps the officers actually will feel that we need to look at whether or not we have a heritage code within Richmond, because it would make their lives a lot easier. They wouldn't have to actually try hard to follow what is required of them within the planning scheme. This is a very dark day as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Alderman Von Berto.
Mr Mayor, a point of clarification. Alderman Von Berto then foreshadowed that she would move the officer's recommendation in the event that this motion is unsuccessful.
Alderman Von Berto.
No, I didn't.
Are there any speakers?
Or can I foreshadow then that if this is unsuccessful, I will move the officer's recommendation.
Thanks, Alderman Bloming. Any other speakers? Alderman Ewington.
Oh, look, I suppose that the difference, with this one, I think this goes a long way. Look, the sign issue, I can understand Alderman Berto's concerns, but, if you put it in perspective, there's no representations against the last sign, right? Whereas this one here, the issue is that it's an unfair advantage being provided to one operator and taking the whole thing to another different level in terms of putting the food vans in amongst the heritage town itself. So I don't compare the two anywhere near the same. But I also agree that this is making a major change, setting a major precedent, which will be very difficult for us to unwind in the future. And I just think that I know there were probably arguments put forward in relation to COVID and making it easy to keep trading as justification for going down this path of doing this before having a permit. But I think it's only fair that we apply these sort of things consistently across the board with all other business operators. And I certainly will support this motion. Whether the sign's there or not, I'm not going to dive and ditch over that one on this one. But there's probably, if we went through the whole town and picked it up, picked every sign, we'd find a fault in a lot of other ones, and that's just taking it too far. There is a need for consistency, but some of the most appreciated and enjoyed things in our world are things that are a little bit outside the square too. So, when no one's being harmed by this, sorry about the signage, slight variations, but I just think this one, the focus here is that it's just totally unfair to have someone operating a food van in the middle of a situation like this, and it's, I certainly support this motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I endorse what Alderman Newington said. This is a different situation. A bright blue square food van in the middle of a heritage precinct does stand out, and if we were to support this, not that the officers are recommending it for support, but I can imagine a food van in the front of every property all the way along Main Road. We wouldn't have our historic heritage listed precinct anymore. I think the signage is neither here nor there. If we're looking at this as a whole motion, the motion is to refuse the food van. If we refuse the food van, the signage goes with it. So we achieve the same end with this, and I think it's just being a little bit piggy to say you can't vote for this without the signage, because I think this achieves that. And, you know, the sign for the museum, I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. It's less of an impact on the landscape or the streetscape than a food van or a building, for example, that doesn't match the heritage code. So I'm quite comfortable supporting this because I think it does adhere to the code and it solves the problem of signage without actually being explicit about it.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right reply, Alderman Moller.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think the two aldermen who spoke in support of the motion, and because I just reiterate, this is about refusing this thing. And the reason for taking out the signage issues, whether or not they are appropriate or not, is simply to make some consistency with our previous decision. Now, if you didn't like the previous decision, I can imagine why you wouldn't like this one. But the point is that it's being put up there in order that this council can be consistent. Now, before we get too high on our high dudgeon about, quote, heritage value, we've got to remember that this is an overlay. We've got to remember that the planning scheme actually says that, you know, it allows for variation of architectural styles and types and all the rest of it, so that the character is maintained, but it is not an authentic reproduction Georgian village, because that horse bolted many, many years ago when we started to put in 1970s square buildings, you know, when we started to do those sorts of things. So, and I also know that, you know, that we can firm up that planning scheme, but we haven't done so. We've deliberately left the heritage overlay in the sense that it is capable of flexibility, it's capable of interpretive, it is capable of moving with the times, and as such, you know, that if we want to have a firm, solid planning scheme, heritage character enrichment, then it's high time we work out which particular areas we want to preserve as a Georgian village. That would be an heritage overlay that we could enforce, and that wouldn't be subject to these sorts of variations and changes. So the point of the exercise is that here it is just to be consistent with the previous decision, and the fact is that whether the signs are not going to be there if this is refused.
Thank you. So the motion is that we refuse the food van application without the clause regarding signage. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. And could we recall Alderman Edmonds, please? Next item on the agenda is 11.5.1, which is we're being asked to endorse a report by the General Manager to the Pitwee on the Tasmanian Draft Container Refund Scheme. Got the move in a second, please. Thanks, Alderman Warren. Second, Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Warren, would you like to speak to it?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a step in the right direction. It may not be perfect, but it's better than some of the schemes interstate. This is just a step in the process It's still got a way to go, including passing through Parliament, but I'm quite comfortable endorsing the direction that this scheme is going.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Other speakers? In case there's no need for a right of reply, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.5.2 is that Council adopts the Single Hill Bushland Reserve Activity Plan 2020 to 2030. Moved Alderman Ewington. Second Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Ewington.
Mr Mayor, I mean, look, the challenge we have in all of these activity plans and is trying to manage the different users and try and find a way that everyone can get their time in the sun and the opportunity to ride horses, ride bikes, walk, and go to have the ability to do that in peace and quiet and be able to do their own thing. And I suppose, look, there's always going to be some people that don't like the particular outcome there, but at least it gives us a framework to start with. A lot of time and effort's gone into this. And over time, I mean, these are living documents that can be modified and changed over time. And if we find that things don't quite work out and there's some people that aren't happy with aspects of this, hopefully it gives us, like I said, a framework to start with. And then down the track, we can go from there. But once we've got this framework in place, trying to make sure that we come up with a plan moving forward to allow more and more people to use this hill. I mean, over the last couple of years with the path from Orderdale through to 7 Mile, I mean, that area has seen a huge amount of increased use. And now with the new paths coming from the retirement village through into the back of the rivulet and as well, I think we'll see more and more people. And it's a good time to bring this forward now and give the community the chance to see that we're serious about continuing to provide really good quality recreational spaces for our community to enjoy.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I agree with just all of what Alderman Ewington has put forward, but I'd actually like my colleagues to consider point 4. Is appropriate, this point now when we haven't finished consultation with the dog policy. And the consultation period, I think, finishes on the 28th of July. I'll just draw your attention to that. That does concern me. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman Kennedy. Other speakers? Alderman Jones.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would seek clarification through you to Mr Graham. No, as you were. Sorry, to his deputy, Grierson. Grierson, thank you. Mr Grierson, Management Action HG4, access and car parking within the reserve for hang gliding and paragliding to be managed through negotiated licences agreement. How is that to be managed? Because you've got hang gliding and you've got paragliding, and presumably they will come down into the car park, or they will fly over the car park, or will they... How is that going to operate? Is that going to be left to council and, as it says in part 1, to the Tasmanian Hang Gliding and Paragliding Association? I just would like to know how it's going to be compatible. Through you, Mr Mayor, of course.
We'll pass on to the General in first instance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Those are the sort of details that we'll need to flesh out. We'll take a risk-based approach to that, and any licence or other agreement will reflect a position that council's comfortable with in terms of managing overall safety.
Thanks.
All right. Alderman Warren.
Yeah, look, I'd just like to comment on the paragliding. I've actually been to the top of Single Hill with the paragliders, and it's a fantastic location. It's 20 minutes from Hobart. All the other prime paragliding sites are a good hour and a half's drive, and it also has the right conditions for paragliding for a lot of the year. So it's wonderful that that could be incorporated in this this plan. I believe that agreement has been in place for some time. So it's not a new agreement, perhaps to allay my colleagues' fears, and has been working well. And as Alderman Newington said, mixed use, having a number of people accessing this site, it's great to be able to include that. And it's a win for Clarence, because I think the other closest paragliding site would be the Southern Midlands or Eagle Hawk Neck. So it's quite a draw card.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Walker and then
Yeah, I
Alderman
think
John.
then Alderman Joyner, that's fine. I appreciate the amount of work that's gone into this and the challenge of trying to balance different and competing and conflicting interests. In relation to paragliding, I guess if it is another form of aircraft, there's a 500-foot minimum that you can cross over private property. I have some concerns the ambiguity around paragliding in this area because you know, I think that there are instances of conflict when people are just, you know, metres high above private property and going over it. So I don't know that I've had adequate comfort around that. And whilst generally in support of this document, again, we have a live process going in relation to dog management, which is why I'm going to be abstaining on this activity plan, which is generally pretty robust and solid, but there's a timing issue.
Thank you. Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I imagine through you to Mr Toohey. And I guess just to pick up on Alderman Kennedy's comment about the DM2, Management Action Plan DM2 in dogs, I mean, is it reasonable to assume, the question, whether that will actually not happen until we finish the dog policy consultation and actually put the new amended policy in place?
Through you, Mr Mayor, that's correct. The dog management policy will take precedence over any reserve activity plan, and how recommendation 4 is worded just makes it dependent upon the outcome of this, what's approved by council in the schedule of declared areas.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Alderman Mother.
On that point, and I think I appreciate the explanation, but I don't think this report has yet gone to the publishers, has it? So could we make it that DM2 is actually couched in those prospective language rather than directly as part of the report that's been published, so that would just get that misunderstanding out of it.
Our Manager or Mr Toohey?
Thank you. Did you have any particular words in mind?
I'm sure that we can come up with some at the time, but I'm just during the debate, if we flag that that's what we wish to do,
yeah,
I think that is sufficient. As long as it's on the public record that we undertake to do that.
I think what is reasonable here is that it not be printed or published until the dog management policy is finalised, and when it is published, it's consistent with that policy. I mean, we can make that undertaking. Thank you.
Having said that, Mr Mayor, I personally think that when you have a look at these reserves and you've got to have a look at the flora and the fauna issues, that I would certainly treat with some concern the fact that we would allow dogs off-lead to be rampaging through bushland and reserve areas. That of course is a debate for the dog conservatives.
Certainly is. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. I was worried about point 4.2, and I spoke to some aldermen today about it, and I like the clarification we did have, but I also like the clarification that Alderman Mulder has mentioned, where we do change it round a bit, because I must admit that did worry me. I'm interested in paragliding, because when I saw that I thought, geez, this is interesting. And look, another thing I've got to do is thank the officers for this report. I had to read it a couple of times, but geez, I think it's a very good report, very comprehensive.
Thank you. Are there any final speakers? Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you. Just to echo some of those concerns about 4 that have been raised, and I think the pathway forward that's been found is good. And to just also say it takes a lot of work to pull together something that takes up about 75% of our agenda paper tonight. Just to thank everyone who was involved in that.
Alderman Ewington, I think, write a reply. In that case, I'll put the motion that we adopt the plan. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to 11.7.1, that Council receives and notes the Code of Conduct Determination Report. Rather than moving the second, please. Moved Alderman Pearce, seconded Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Pearce, do you wish to speak to it?
No, Mayor, I think it's the apology's been there. I think that's all we need to do.
Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Other speakers? Alderman Ewington?
Yeah, look, just look, I'm never going to, I'll say what I think when I think I need to say it, and I certainly respect everyone's right to do that, including our fellow colleagues in the chamber and also the general community. But I suppose in this situation, that comes with a pretty major caveat, which is that when we do say things publicly or when we make sure we get it right. I mean, I had major concerns about some of the comments that Alderman Jones made at the time about this, and the real issue here is that it don't take one misleading comment to completely derail a community consultation process about an issue which is pretty important that we get right. Mainly because of the, it's a complex issue, it's a complex legal issue, but the main thing is there that the financial implications of us, corrupting the whole situation or letting the community get misleading in those sort of situations, and I mean that was a major concern to me. And look, I acknowledge Alderman Jones's apologies tonight, and I appreciate the fact that he's done that. But I suppose the thing that's really important to me is that we're getting bigger and over the next few years we are going to be dealing with some major complex issues that do leave us in a situation where we are potentially leading ourselves into some pretty complex legal and financial sort of situations, and I'd encourage all of us to be really careful in the future going forward. I mean, say what you think, but I suppose I just hope that we can move forward from this one and hopefully with the ongoing debate with the whole process and make sure that we we keep the community informed and we make sure that they get the full facts all of the time, because that's the only way that we come up with really good decisions. And I just hope that this is in the past and there's a chance to sort of start afresh and really make sure that we find a really good way of engaging with the community, giving them the facts, and letting them make sure that they understand why we're making the decisions that we are.
Thank you, Alderman John.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question to the General Manager of the review. This motion receives and notes the report, but doesn't actually note the apology that was made. And I wonder if it would be useful, perhaps, with the mover and seconders' rights to add, instead of a full stop after one, a comma, and then and the attendant apology given at the council meeting, or something along those lines to actually acknowledge that that was done.
Given and received? Yes. Accepted probably is the right word.
Yeah. That's what I'll buy into it.
If the mover and second are happy with that? Yes. Thank you. Any other speakers? Alderman Mulder?
Yeah, I was a little reluctant to speak, but since comment has been made, I feel that I have to at least put a few points on the record. I do not condone and did not condone Alderman Jones's actions, and I accept his apology. In your own words, Mr. Mayor, this is the worst council you've seen in 25 years, because a culture of angry attacks, threats and personality politics has been allowed to thrive. In the context of passionate debate and the context of ideas, this would not be an earth-shattering event. Were it not for the code of conduct process, a standard of behaviour that Parliament is happy to force on us, but we stay daily, fail miserably. The business of holding each other and the staff to account is not always pleasant. And as our colleague in Hobart, Alderman Baraka and others have discovered, an adverse finding on these, what I call petty issues, is almost a badge of honour. Mayors of all people need to toughen up a bit. After the program, a caller came on the air to say, I was with Alderman Jones until his attack turned personal. Then he lost me. That is the court of public opinion. That for elected members ought to be sufficient judgment. None of us are pure. We all fall short at times, or at least I like it. There have been worse utterances under Alderman letterhead that have brought embarrassment and caused offence to members of this council. And where you have had to point that out, that the Alderman was not speaking for council. The apology you initially sought would have been forthcoming had you not chosen to write an open letter to the media. And any prospect of an apology was utterly destroyed when another Alderman, in an all too familiar reply or angry type, demanded a public apology within 48 hours for this reprehensible behaviour, or a code of conduct will ensue. Mr Mayor, he wasn't even the victim. The Local Government Act imposes on the Mayor the responsibility for managing elected members. Your failure to inform that member that this matter did not concern him amounts to a failure of leadership on your part.
Point of order, Alderman Moulder. The Local Government Act most certainly does not give me the power to manage elected members. I'd like to make sure that that's firmly on the record.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And prevent this issue being resolved with a simple apology we heard tonight. This is not the only occasion where there has been no intervention in angry attacks on fellow aldermen who dare to hold a different view. On one occasion, Mr Mayor, you left it to the General Manager to intercede in a dispute over school pickups at the Harrow Community Centre. When the committee member who had raised this issue in council was subjected to pompous outrage and missives erroneously telling him it was absolutely not his call, I would argue, Mr Mayor, you should have intervened. When the General Manager enters the realm of politically squabbling, he is decidedly uncomfortable, as he should be. I would argue, Mr Mayor, that's your role. Then there was the issue of area council, quite wrongly, publicly denigrated council staff. Again, it was left to the General Manager to intervene. Mr Mayor, it is your statutory responsibility to manage interactions between elected members and the General Manager, not for others to be writing letters to the editor. These are just two pertinent examples of many instances where members use reply all emails to attack, denigrate or bully fellow councillors. The way forward is simple enough. If you have an issue with a colleague, take it up one-to-one. And if it isn't resolved, at least go to you. Don't go public, either with reply all, social media outbursts or editorial letters. Anger management is a common theme to many of these outbursts, but it is possible to be passionate without being angry, without shouting, without belittling and without mocking. None of us are pure, but for some it seems to be a modus operandi. We would all benefit from an anger management program. For some it will be to manage their own anger, for others it will be managing the anger of others. I suspect for all of us it will be a bit of both. Mr Mayor, this is not a good look. I do not condone Alderman James's behaviour, nor that of my colleagues who seek to bully us. I note the report and accept the decision.
Thank you, Alderman Moulder. I'm sure you'll have the opportunity to put in a submission to the government's review of the Code of Conduct. Any other speakers?
Mr Mayor, I wasn't going to talk on this one at all tonight, but I can't let it go now, having just heard, being subjected to that, what I've heard this evening, Mr Mayor. First, I'd just like to congratulate Alderman James. He came into this place, held his head high and apologised. On the record, up front, and straight off the bat of his own bat. And to him, I say thank you, and he has my renewed respect now because, like some other colleagues in this place, I listened to those radio interviews. One I listened to a recording, I listened to both of them. I was not impressed at the time, absolutely not impressed at the time, and then to deal with the resultant fallout from concerned residents. So to Alderman James, again, I say thank you. You've conducted yourself tonight with integrity. Of course, the Code of Conduct process, Mr Mayor, is flawed. It actually is flawed. It is far from being a perfect mechanism. And really, in many respects, it's a last resort. Tonight we've dealt with the second Code of Conduct issue in this iteration of Council. The first one was back on the 20th of January of last year. And that we noted the report at that time. And in that report, Alderman Moulder was recorded as saying that he would offer an apology to the 16-year-old individual involved there. Now, as of 5 o'clock this afternoon, Mr Mayor, unlike Alderman James, Alderman Moulder has not provided that apology some 17 months later. So I say when people want to talk about bullying, people want to come in here and seek to be as pure as a driven snow, Mr Mayor, I just sort of say that the hypocrisy is something that really, really annoys me, and that's not anger management, it's me being honest. I cannot stand hypocrisy, and I will not stand for hypocrisy, but to Alderman James, I say thank you. You've won my renewed respect this evening.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
Personal explanations.
No. Any other speakers? Alderman Edmonds.
Yeah, I'll put on record there's serious issues with this code of conduct process because and I'm talking generally, having read some of the instances at other councils, it needs to have a threshold of glass jawrism in it. You know, like I look at my time on this council, I could have gone to the code of conduct panel 5 or 6 times. But that's the world we live in, and potentially maybe 1 or 2 people could at least vexatiously have done the same to me. But I feel reasonably comfortable in my own conduct. But I think to pick up on some of the themes that was just discussed then about hypocrisy and things like that, I mean, I think that's what it really comes down to, is that if you're going to roll with the punches, then you should roll with them. And I think when this process is reviewed, it needs to be a bit more robust around the fact that it's very easy, and we've had debates in Clarence about political correctness gone mad and things like that. It's very easy to be offended in 2021 for people. It's perhaps more of a challenge to sort of strike the balance between knowing what's robust political debate and what's inappropriate. We could potentially do with some work around that as a group, and probably as a group of 29 councils, and indeed probably our friends in Canberra in particular, but also over in Salamanca. So I don't really know what I'm saying, other than I think that the code of conduct is flawed in the fact that the threshold for what's complain-aboutable and what's not complain-aboutable is a complete mess. I think if you went looking for things to refer people for, you could find them quite easily and have them gagged for months. I don't think that is in the interest of anyone. So and to footnote that, thank you for the apology, Alderman James. I didn't really feel like I needed it, but I appreciate you being man enough to do it.
Thank you. Alderman Walker, and then Alderman Pearce.
I also want to put on record that I appreciate the spirit in which the apology was offered, and I appreciate the spirit in which the apology was received. Over my time in this iteration of council, I have passionately and incandescently disagreed with each alderman, and passionately agreed with each as well. Different issues, different concerns, and everyone around this table has brought different strengths, perspectives and insights onto this council, and has a role to play at different times as we go through every item. I would like to make this point though. The Walker household received the rates notice, I think, was it last week or the week before? It's sitting on our fridge. Its due date, I think, is the 2nd of August. And there would be hundreds of white goods around this municipality with the fridge magnet, with the quarterly rates for it. Theoretical about the tyranny of indirect taxation versus direct taxation. There's an element to that, because in different countries where it's just automatically deducted from your salary, you don't see it, you don't miss it, but with rates notices, it sits there, it's glaring at you, and you have to part with money. You have to bring that down to the counter here, you have to go on the phone or the internet and see the money leave your bank account and arrive here. And I raise that because the cost of living pressures continue, and we really need to just continue to strive to be better versions of ourselves and better iteration of ourselves, because when, you know, it hurts more when you have to directly pay when you see compared to other iterations of government where you don't. So I'll leave it there, I think.
Okay. And Alderman Pearce. Actually, you're the mirror of the motion.
Yes,
so
I thought you were summing up. Sorry.
Yeah. Are there any? I'll ask. Are there any other speakers finally? If not, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. And like others, I do congratulate Alderman James on the way he issued the apology. In my time, and I've been here a while, I can speak, this is one of the hardest councils I've ever worked with, and we talk about code of conduct. I've never in my lifetime seen so much rudeness and bad language directed at other aldermen. So yes, if the code of conduct does need a review, you know, I totally agree with that, because honestly, I don't think some of the aldermen who've had to put up with stuff around this table should have to do that. So I'm all for that, I really hope that we can all work together. We're all not perfect. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. But geez, I hope we can work better together. We're not going to agree with each other. How can we? We've all got different opinions of everything else. But you know, let's get on making the city great. Let's stick to that principle.
Thank you. So the motion is that we receive and note the Code of Conduct Determination Report, note Alderman James' apology and its acceptance. All those in favour?
Do I vote?
You're quite welcome to vote.
And
I think that was carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to Alderman's question time. There are no matters on notice. Answers to questions on notice from the last council meeting we'll take as read. Questions without notice. Alderman Moller. Sorry?
12.3 questions on notice, previous council meeting.
Yeah, we've taken those as read. They're in the agenda.
I had a query on one of them.
Oh, okay. Certainly.
Mr Mayor, the question I asked related to whether or not the conversion of the proposed hotel into private apartments would require changes to the building to enable there to be private open space. The answer I was given on the night was correct, that it was a little bit hypothetical because it required a change to the planning scheme. And then there's a subsequent answer that says it does not permit residential use. Any proposal to change hotel accommodation apartments will first require a planning scheme amendment. My question was prospective on that. That amendment would have to, if that amendment were to occur, would there needed to be changes to the building? And that question is yet to be answered. So on the assumption that it was permitted for private apartments, would there need to be changes to that current building to provide for private open space?
I think it's premature to say, is it? Mr. Lovell, is that, are you in a position to provide an answer there?
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. It is a hypothetical question, obviously, but the answer is along the lines that simply would depend on the nature of the amendment to the scheme. In other words, the council could provide a control that would require open space to be provided or not as part of the assessment process. So it's impossible to say at this point whether or not the building should change.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just one from me, which I think is for Mr Lovell. I just want to...
Oh, sorry, Mr Mayor, I haven't asked my questions without notice.
Yeah.
Is that what I was on agenda item correctly. I dragged the council back to 12.3, which was answers to previous questions I noticed, and I was just seeking some clarification on that one, which I've now had. So I think, Mr Mayor, if you was to call 12.4 now, I would then ask a question.
Look, please continue. I did actually call from before, but go ahead.
Mr Mayor, I refer to the $45 Liberal Party fundraiser attended by yourself, the General Manager, and Alderman Blondin at Margate on October 21st, 2020. Did Clarence ratepayers contribute to the Liberal Party coffers either directly or by way of any reimbursement to any of the aforementioned attendees at that function?
I can say that the General Manager, at my encouragement, and I attended at the expense of the ratepayers, about $45 per head for the breakfast. Pardon me. I will add to the comments that I provided to your question on the 18th of January, and which are in the 9th of February agenda, that I accepted that as an invitation from the Minister to attend a regional forum with other mayors and general managers, and did not realise at the time that we were accepting a party invitation or a party function. Did you have a second question?
Just on Mr Mayor, if I may, to that question, please, and also going back to the 19th February minutes, And just to reiterate the point that I made then, is that along with many other community leaders in southern Tasmania, you, the General Manager, and myself attended. I didn't attend as an alderman at Clarence City Council. I attended as someone that was interested to hear what the Minister for Infrastructure had to say for southern Tasmania. So I think it's a bit questionable, sort of, again, asking, rehashing these sorts of questions.
Second question, Alderman Mulder.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the invitation makes it quite clear that it is a Liberal Party invitation with a logo, and it is actually an authorised brochure, and I'm happy to table it. I think that might be the best way to go. Table it, which makes it clear that it's authorised by the Secretary of the Liberal Party, and the address given is Liberal Party headquarters in Salamanca Place. Certainly not the office of the Minister. So my question is is it appropriate that the ratepayers are funding such a public function?
I state again that I attended the function on the understanding it was an invitation from the Minister, and under the circumstances it was appropriate that that from time to time that the General Manager and myself, and indeed all of the aldermen around this table, represent council at the ratepayers' expense. Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one from me, as I started on a moment ago. Following on from a question from Alderman James at our last meeting, and this is to Mr. Lovell, where Alderman James has asked about under delegation by council officers. Are you able to advise council in the last financial year how many of these particular applications were there that have been at least 2 or more representations being approved by officers under delegation? I'd just like to ask if one of those, the answer is 2 in the last financial year or the last 12 months, is one of those 28 Apple Place?
Mr. Mayor, I believe it is, yes.
Alderman Ewington.
Yeah, just one. Look, I had a conversation with a gentleman I know in the community who's mixed up with the volunteer fire brigade down in Lawnblow. And he talked to me about the possibility of looking at moving their site from where they are into around the tip site. I was just wondering whether then that was going to, I suppose, come to us in a workshop or something like that. Is that still happening, or is that still being discussed, or is that still a possibility?
Jim?
Thank you. I can update council on that. We have had a couple of discussions now with the TFS regarding a potential move down to the entranceway to the old Orderdale tip site. There are 2 sites there. They have a preference for one of those over the other. And at this point in time, the ball is back with the TFS to look at their situation and design and so forth. There are some planning issues and inundation issues and so forth, so the site is relatively complex, but not impossible. So that's a matter that I would describe as progressing at this point in time.
Thank you. Alderman Walker.
Yes, thank you. Firstly, through you to Mr. Lovell, is there an update on discussions all the way forward in relation to the ability to amend and make more flexible car parking contributions?
Mr. Mayor, I seem to recall we did a briefing report on that a short time ago, where we explained the status of it. I'm happy to have another look and see whether this see that happens. We've done no further work since that time.
Sounds like we'll provide an update in the weekly briefing.
Update, thank you.
I'm happy to come back to you if you like.
Appreciate
Alderman
that.
Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. I wonder if someone can give me an update on the driveway around the Orderdale football oval. I was down there the other day and I couldn't believe how bad it had got, and that's not council's fault. But I'm just wondering if they've got a big fundraiser for the footballer that was injured off-ground incident next Saturday, and I'm just wondering if we do something with it, because I've never seen potholes on a ground so deep. And look, I'm not saying we have to do a good job. Can we just fill those potholes in?
Mr. Grierson, are you?
Yeah, I'll try and answer that one for you, Mr. Mayor. There is an Alderman request, I think, from Alderman Newington about that, and a grader has been booked in to regrade the area. There are some bollards and ribbons and things that the club needed to move out of the way, which has been also arranged so the grader's got access. So that work's programmed to happen. Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Grierson. Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I have two questions tonight. First one refers to a vicious dog attack on a 79-year-old Gilson Bay resident that occurred outside the Ristonvale food store on the 23rd of last month. An attack that was so severe, Mr. Mayor, that 4 adult males were required to assist the elderly gentleman and remove the offending animal. This attack that knocked the elderly resident to the ground resulted in puncture wounds to his arm, lacerations and skin loss consistent with a dog bite. As a result of the fall, the gentleman sustained extensive bruising on his lower lumbar region, buttocks and tailbone. This unprovoked vicious attack resulted in several visits to the doctor. As I'm sure we would all appreciate, this has been a traumatic experience for the 79-year-old gentleman and his family. Mr. Mayor, I understand that our rangers were quick to respond and proposed that the offending dog be surrendered to a dog's home for behavioural assessment. Over the weekend, I was advised that a dog had been relinquished to our rangers, but this was not the offending dog, but rather an innocent animal. Mr. Mayor, can you please advise if it is the case the offending dog is still within the community?
Mr. Toohey.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the case is still under investigation and should be concluded this week. But however, no dog has been relinquished to council. At the time of the attack, there were 2 dogs, two dogs that were tethered but became untethered, and only one of those dogs allegedly attacked the elderly gentleman. And at the time of the initial contact with the gentleman, he didn't wish us to formalise the complaint and proceed with it, apart from just making sure the owner of the dog was aware of the incident and the dog was being kept under control. However, since then, he has now formalised that complaint, and we are now proceeding with enforcement action under the Dog Control Act.
Thank you. Alderman Blomley,
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Just on that, I thank Mr. Toohey for that answer. Clearly we have a duty to keep all our residents. It's bad enough it happened to a 79-year-old gentleman. Next time it could be a 5-year-old child.
It is question time, Alderman Blomley.
Yeah, well, my next question, I'm just making that point, Mr. Mayor. It's not a
Sure.
The 79-year-old man's in hospital at the moment. So, in Saturday's Mercury, the newly branded vessel for the River Derwent passenger ferry service was unveiled. Can you please advise when the trial service will actually begin and will have passengers traversing the River Derwent?
General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor and Alderman Blomley. The latest advice I've received today is that the expectation is that the ferry service should be operating by around the end of July, but I don't have a firm actual date at this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you. Reluctantly. I will follow up a question from Alderman Mulder. How has it ever in either the General Manager or your experience come that you have to pay an entry fee to meet with a Minister or any Member of Parliament?
It's not usual, but it's not unprecedented.
So it's happened in the past?
I take that on notice. I need to go back through. Thank you.
That's all. Thanks.
Alderman Von Berto.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My first question is, what will be the trigger for revised seating arrangements for aldermen, staff and visitors who attend council meetings and workshops? Given the current investigation into local COVID transmission in Tasmania, the strong possibility that COVID will present in Tasmania, in the Tasmanian community in the future, the concern as to the extremely transmissible Delta variant, the voluntary nature and relatively low level of fully vaccinated adults within the Tasmanian and Australian populations, and the fact that aldermen and senior staff are currently seated for 2 to 3 hours at often less than 1.5 metres apart in council meetings and workshops.
Thank you for the the question through you, Mayor. At this point in time, I don't have an answer to that. We are extremely constrained, as you're aware, in terms of the space that we have available. If the
Not 1.5 metres.
I understand that. I can see that. If there is a change in circumstances, or if council decides that the current arrangements aren't appropriate, then I'll take appropriate action. But at this point in time, I don't have an answer that's better than that.
As a supplementary question to that, has the advice provided to me last week by a previous staff member that there's an extra leaf to the council horseshoe table being investigated? And if it is available, can it be put in place for the next council meeting?
Thank you for that supplementary. That was news to me last week. I've had that investigated. We can't find that extra leaf. We understand that it may have existed for a period of time post the 1993 council amalgamations, but it certainly hasn't been seen in the 25 years that I've been around.
And my second question is, could council be provided with the current status of the Premier's Economic and Social Recovery Advisory Council recommendations, March 2021, which relate to the Tasmanian Parliament sponsoring a process to drive structural reform of Tasmania's local government sector by setting the terms of reference for the process, setting a time frame of about 18 months for completion, and committing to implementing the recommendations without material modification?
I've heard nothing at this point in time, other than I understand there's a Premier's Local Government Council meeting scheduled very soon. I don't know whether you've got any information on that, GM, as a General Manager's representative on that committee?
Yeah, it's mid-August from memory. 17th is stuck in my head, so around mid-August is a PLGC meeting, which if there was an update, I'd expect to have it at that point.
No doubt will be advised.
Yes.
Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I referred to the weekly briefing report, and at this stage I want to ask a question in relation to that. It's to do with the Clarence LPS modifications to a substantial degree on the 28th of June. Now my question through you to Mr Lovell. Mr Lovell, in that memorandum that you sent to us, the Mayor and Alderman, you refer to minor zoning changes in the Lindisfarne Ridge Flagstaff Gully, and it's generally, the change is generally limited to rezoning at 16 Kent. In the actual decision of the TPC, it says, and this is really, I need clarification, that no further change to rezoning or changes to the ridge in Flagstaff Gully have to occur subject to a structure plan. Is my reading of the TPC's decision still dependent upon a structure plan for that area, please?
Can we take that on notice? So it's a good question, Alderman James. And maybe you can get a briefing on that. The consequences of that decision, a briefing in the weekly briefing report on it. At the moment, it does include the report, but we would appreciate more information on the consequences of what the decisions were.
The second question is on the similar matter. It doesn't appear to have addressed the Acton Corridor LPS change. Is that still to happen or to come, please?
Through Mr Mayor, no decisions have been made as such on the recommendations of the council. The TPC hasn't decided whether those things you haven't mentioned they're going to ultimately approve or not. All they have done is advise the council those aspects they wish to be advertised as changes. Their decisions on the scheme as a whole, including those matters they have not raised now, such as Acton or Sandford or other parts of the Lindisfarne area, are matters we have given no indication on, until the final decision is made.
Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question relates to page 4 of the agenda, where it lists the workshop topics for the council for the last 2 weeks. I note that the final workshop topic is listed as a confidential briefing. Now, we all understand that the contents of those workshops are absolutely confidential, but I know that we've had confidential briefings in the past where the topic at least has been included. So in the interests of openness and transparency, can you please, and perhaps through you to the General Manager, explain to me the criteria under which you decide whether the topic is included or whether we just have a blanket confidential briefing with no indication of the topic?
Thank you for the question, Alderman Warren. There's not any specific rule. We exercise our judgment as to how that should appear. So we'd be happy to take guidance from Council.
It's difficult for me to ask a supplementary question without specifics.
I'm happy to take it shortly.
I'd just be interested in why this particular topic was only labelled as confidential.
Can we deal with that shortly?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to the end of the open session of Council. If we could close the feed, please.